So Ginny D just made a video about preventing problems in Dungeons & Dragons, and her solution pointed to the classic Session Zero. It's a great video and you should check it out, but there is one thing I want to talk about. Session Zero is awesome, and you should be doing it. I staunchly believe that any game that wants to be good must have a Session Zero. It is mandatory. I'm not trying to dog Session Zeros, because, again, they're mandatory. You need them, they're great. However, they're not a silver bullet for every single problem in Dungeons & Dragons. Some issues can arise even after a Session Zero has happened. You could do everything right, do everything on your Session Zero checklist. Everything could be going great, and then something unexpected happens during your D&D game. We see it constantly on this channel. And oftentimes, the fallback after the Session Zero is just communicate. And look, that's just very unhelpful advice. I have been guilty of giving this advice myself, hence why I try to explain how to communicate in every single RPG horror story video. However, a lot of the times, those situations I talk about in those videos are very specific. And honestly, I've done 200 episodes of that show, and I haven't even touched the surface of all the social dynamics and social situations that you might need to deal with when a problem arises at your D&D game. So today, I want to do a little catch-all guide. We're going to talk about my 3 categories of D&D problems and the ways to solve them through communication. Explain how to communicate before you communicate. Hopefully, this can help you out if you ever encounter some sort of problem at your D&D game. Without further ado, let's get started. Now, before we start, I do want to address this. I am assuming you did all of the other stuff. You know, I'm assuming you did a Session Zero. I'm assuming you went over the things you're comfortable with and uncomfortable with. You did all of those steps. Those are your main line of defense, and you need to do those things. This is your final line of defense, the keep that you fall back to at Helm's Deep, you know what I mean? This isn't something you should rely on. Session Zero is your first priority, but these are things that are helpful to know, especially when dealing with this first thing, the minor issues. Often, minor issues are just going to be what you encounter during your D&D game. A player who doesn't remember all their abilities and sometimes can slow down combat, or scheduling issues that can slow down your game just in general. Often, these things aren't somebody doing something that's extremely disruptive to the game. They start off as little minor pricks in your experience that you don't think much of. However, if they add up and if they build up over time, they can bloom into bigger issues, hence why you need to talk about them. Now, these problems are usually the subject of a person. Usually a person is doing these things, and hence that person is somebody that you need to talk to. Now, this is much less complicated if you are the Dungeon Master. Whether you wanted it or not, Dungeon Masters have inherited a position of leadership at their table, and therefore they're in the best position to communicate about issues regarding the game. Now, if you're not the Dungeon Master, you should probably talk to your Dungeon Master about this and hope that they can solve the issue. However, with these minor horror stories, I don't think there's anything wrong with a player addressing these things. Again, they're minor problems. A Dungeon Master's touch is probably not required, especially with stuff like scheduling, stuff that might just come up in innocuous conversation. Anyway, point is, I think that this advice can apply to both DMs and players. Now, in my opinion, these minor things are the easy mode. You can just shoot a text, give a call, meet after the session, whatever communication method you prefer. This is a minor situation and can be talked about fairly casually. However, again, there might be something deeper here that you don't understand, especially with stuff like scheduling. Like a player is late, but you don't fully understand what's going on, which is why the first step is to ask the question. Hey man, what's happening? If you have a player who's extremely tired during the games and seems not to be paying attention, ask them about that. Don't make assumptions. Don't say, you're just falling asleep during the game because you're bored, or you're not scheduling properly because you're lazy. Don't assume those things. That might be obvious to some people, but even if you're not being accusatory in that manner, a lot of people can become accusatory without even meaning to. Start off with the question. Ask them what's going on. It shows them that you care and that your first priority is helping them and helping the game, not making accusations or passing blame. Listen to what they have to say and try to understand where they're coming from. That is the next step. You need to understand what they're saying here before you come up with a solution. You can't come up with a solution to a problem that you don't fully understand. So listen to what's going on. Are they late because of issues at work? Are they tired because they have to stay up late doing some homework for school? You know, these things are things that you need to listen to before you come up with a solution. Then after that, ask them what they think they can do about it. Ask for their solution before presenting your own. This is something that I do a lot because it shows that you want to hear what they have to say about this. You care about their input on this situation and aren't just trying to enforce your own decisions upon them. Of course, you should also communicate what you think could be done about this. The key here and the key to all of these is not to be hostile, especially here, but this applies to everything we're about to talk about. If you show signs of hostility, it can make the player defensive, and that is just going to make the problem way worse. This should be a more casual conversation. You're not trying to solve some international crisis. You're trying to solve scheduling problems for a Dungeons and Dragons game. Like I said before, it shouldn't be accusatory. You're trying to find a solution together. You're working together to solve this problem. They're not the bad guy, you're not the good guy, you're just two players trying to have fun together. So, figure out a solution and then go from there. Now, to me, problem players are different from that guys. That guys are players who are doing things intentionally and don't care about the rest of their party. That is a whole other can of worms we're about to open in a second. Problem players are players who are doing things that are problems for the game. Things that make the game less fun for the other players or for the DM. However, it's not really intentional. It's like a min-maxer who has a really powerful character while everyone else is using pretty substandard specs. Or a player who is really extroverted and just talking a lot at the table and kind of taking the spotlight. Not intentionally, they're just doing it because that's the way they communicate and speak. Or on the opposite end, an introvert who's not really engaging with the story, but mostly just because they're nervous or new to the game. These are problems that can kind of bring down the vibe of the group, but nobody's doing this with malicious intent, and usually they don't even understand that what they're doing is wrong. Which is why, when you communicate with this person, first and foremost, you need to take it a little bit more seriously than a text conversation. When you're dealing with issues like this, I recommend talking about it in person. However, the important thing is, don't spring it on them. Don't just pull them aside after the game unexpectedly. Shoot them a text before the game starts to say, hey, can we talk before the game or after the game in private? That can prepare them for the conversation and let them know that there's something that they need to talk about. Now, I've had mixed results on whether or not you should specify what you want to talk about. I always have, though I've heard that that can kind of leave a player hanging on a cliffside, so to speak, if you tell them, hey, I want to talk about your min-maxing without specifying further. That can kind of leave them in a very awkward position. So maybe you should leave that spot blank and just tell them that you want to talk without specifying. I don't know which one is really better. I haven't extensively tested this or anything. It's just really whatever you think is best for your players at your table. Alright, now that you have pulled the player aside, you have a private conversation, what now? First things first. Clarify what the issue is. This is extremely important. Like I said before, a lot of the time, the player won't understand what they're doing is wrong. And you need to clarify, look, when you talk that much at the table, for example, this really hurts the other players and their roleplay. Now, it's important, and I'm stealing this from DnD, it's important not to essentialize people. Don't say something like, you do this, or you are this. Don't say, you are a spotlight hog, or you are ruining the game for everyone else. Those things are not productive, they don't help, and are just going to make the other person kind of rightfully defensive, because, again, you're being very accusatory. Instead, say something like, hey, I feel like the other players at the table aren't role-playing as much because you often take the spotlight very actively. If you could you invite other players in while you're playing your character? Try to prompt them to roleplay so that more people can participate. Now, if you noticed, I presented the problem and I offered a solution. However, asking them for their solution to this issue, that's also really good. Like I said before, asking them for their solution shows that they're part of this conversation. You're not just enforcing some decision upon them. They can also help to make this better. I've actually discussed this before with Crit Crab. When it comes to these mid-level problem players, you can often accompany the solution with a compliment. We'll go back to that Spotlight Hog example. You could say, hey, look, I love your roleplay, and I think it would be even better if you could invite other players in while you're roleplaying, because often they're not able to participate as much because your character takes a lot of that spotlight. That is a way to both compliment what they're doing right and offer a way to make it better, both for them and for the other players. Honestly, these more mid-level problem players can be the most complicated sometimes because they're not an out-and-out villain, but at the same time, they're making the game less fun for other people, so it can feel kind of awkward when you're trying to present the solution. I know I present a lot of information here, but the main bulk of it is this. Make sure to acknowledge what they're doing right. Give them a compliment compliment if they deserve it. But also at the same time, make sure to acknowledge what the problem is. Acknowledge the good and the bad of this player and work together to discover a solution. Now, of course, if you're presenting this criticism and they explode in anger or they get really defensive and upset, if you're being civil and they get mad at you for it, then that evolves into a whole nother problem player. Now we're talking about that guy. These are your incel types, your racists, the players who really ruin the game, the people who can't take criticism, the people who don't care about criticism, the people who don't care the other players at your table. Now, the same logic from the previous people applies. A lot of the time, these people don't understand that what they're doing is bad. They view themselves as doing what's best for them and the rest of the players. Not everyone is a psychopath, you know? But look, at the end of the day, these are more severe issues, and therefore they need to be dealt with a little bit more seriousness. Now, I think the first order of business with this is to discuss it with the other players. I've been in this situation where I had a problem player, and I didn't really know what to do about it. However, one thing that could have guided my hand a little bit was figuring out what the other Whoops. Because I wasn't the only one struggling with this. My other players shared their sentiments, and if I had said something, we could have had communication and figured out a solution together. Also, it would have made me feel a little bit less insecure about feeling that this person is a problem player. Oftentimes, people think that their opinions are isolated. Remember, we're playing in a D&D group, and you only really know your own thoughts. Unless you talk to your group about a problem player, everyone can just individually assume that they're the only one who sees the problem and feel like everyone else is just fine and dandy, when that's not the truth at all. In essence, I recommend communicating with the other players about this. Ask them if they see the same issues that you do and go from there. Now, of course, I do want to say this. Don't use this as an opportunity to just backtalk someone. I think it's just as much of a horror story if all the players get together to create a group chat to just crap talk somebody without developing any sort of solutions. That is bad, not good. Now that you've gotten your testimonials, so to speak, go to that guy and have a similar conversation to what we have with the problem player. One-on-one, just you and them talking about the problem. Again, give them a heads up before doing so you don't spring this on them. Make sure to act civil so they don't get defensive. And now we go from here. This is where things are different. Because you have these testimonials, tell that guy about them. Tell them about what the other players think. Now, don't call anyone out. Don't say, so-and-so said that you're ruining the game. Instead, say this. They feel like your comments are inappropriate, or they feel like your play is hurting the rest of the table, etc., etc., etc. Now, I know there's a temptation to sort of like hold back a little bit here, but if the issue is severe, you need to present it as such. Because if you hold back too much, you're not going to communicate what's really wrong at the table. I did this a lot with my own problem players. I didn't tell them fully what's going on. I didn't tell them what I felt or what the other players felt because I was afraid of hurting them. But I just hurt all of us more by not being plain with my communication. That was my mistake. Now, don't be vitriolic. There's a fine line between being too nice and too mean, but a nice middle ground of just telling them what is a good way to start off. Now, look, I love second chances. I think second chances are necessary for everybody. However, there are lines that some players are just not going to want crossed. If somebody breaks someone's boundaries in a way that they are really hurt by it, you might need to just let the player go, even if they swear they will get better. I understand. I completely understand empathizing with somebody wanting to improve. However, remember, you are under no obligation to stay with somebody who is hurting you or your friends or your group or whatever. You can wish them best of luck in their improvement, their self-improvement, but you don't need to be a part of that process. If they're hurting you, if they're hurting your friends, it's okay to let them go. In fact, I would say it's healthy. I've been in that situation. I've been in that situation where somebody swore up and down, like, I'll get better, I'll get better, I'll get better, and then they didn't. And yes, this was a D&D game, and it hurt me way more than it should have. But because I was unable to let this person go because I trusted them in a way I probably shouldn't have, it just hurt everyone all the more. Now, of course, if you and the rest of the players are okay with giving this guy a second chance if they try to take one, then that's great. Give him a second chance, and hopefully all will turn out well. Now, worst case scenario, you have this conversation, you're civil, you present the facts as they are, and this person gets really upset. They get really mad, they react with hostility. To me, that's an instant kick. If they get upset, if they rage, if they try to manipulate you, those things are never, ever, ever acceptable. Guilt trips are something I've experienced through Dungeons and Dragons of all things, and that is not good. That is a no-go from me. That is absolutely something that results in instant removal from a game. Now, I hate doing that. I hate saying you should just kick someone out without, giving them a second chance, because, again, we're all trying to have fun playing this game together, and we don't want to kick someone out without giving them a second chance. But manipulation, rage quitting, those things are a lot more serious than somebody just being kind of a spotlight hog sometimes. This also applies to the super extreme RPG horror story kind of things, but I like to think those are kind of rare. These situations, these that guy situations are rare, but when they happen, I find a lot of times people can kind of be that deer in the headlights. However, if somebody's hurting you and your friends, you're just going to get hurt more if you let it fester and don't deal with the problem. I know these are all things we've said many times before, but it was always scattered across a 200 episode video series, and I figured that I would give a little bit more of a concise guide to dealing with problem players. This isn't going to be a silver bullet, because nothing is. We are complicated, silly, messy people with complicated, silly, messy situations, and therefore there's never going to be a silver bullet to any of those things. However, I hope that this gave you the vocabulary to help to solve these problems. The key here is empathy, having it for the other player. And if they don't have empathy for you, that's another key, a key to kicking someone right out of your game. If you guys enjoyed and found this helpful, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, you can check out our 200 episode RPG horror story series, where we cover the best of the worst of Dungeons and Dragons. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment, deal with the problem, to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And this is like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.